lectins. Have you ever wondered about what people are talking about online when they talk about avoiding them? So, should you avoid them? What does the research actually say? Let's dive into it. I'm Ashley.
And hello, I'm Danielle.
We're the Crohn's and colitis dietitians, and we're here to make nutrition a little bit easier and a little more fun. So let's dive into what a lectin actually is, because no one's talking about that. Everyone's talking about, oh my gosh, you should avoid them. These are all the harms, but no one's talking about what it actually is and the whole picture. So yeah, explain a little bit about what they are.
Yeah, so lectins are simply a protein found in plants. They bind to carbohydrates and they're commonly found in higher amounts in our nuts, legumes, seeds, wheat, and veggies as well. I feel like people get a weird vibe about them because they're also labeled as an anti-nutrient, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. But an anti-nutrient is something that we don't need to be afraid of. It just simply means that it's something that can impair the absorption of other nutrients. But again, we will talk about that in a little bit because there are ways to lessen the effect of that happening. And there's also some things that, of course, we're going to talk about in a positive light around lectins as well. But simply put, lectins are a protein found in plants. And Ashley, the reason that they have that bad rap around it too, it all stems from them trying to survive, right? Survive in the wilderness, much like, you and I are now too. Everybody has their mechanisms to how they survive. And, lectins have these anti-nutrients, or they're labeled as an anti-nutrient. And if you consume it raw, there's a really good chance that your gut is not going to like you.
Yeah, I think that's maybe where some of the misconceptions came about with lectins is if you're consuming like raw beans, for example, which you shouldn't be, but if you were, yes, there's high amounts of lectins, which can be very problematic for people. But all of that changes when you cook a food. And one thing that you said was lectins are found in all foods. And I think that's important to highlight in that it's not just the foods that are often talked about. It's in everything. And it's because plants produce things to protect themselves. In the same way, other things plants produce to protect themselves are antioxidants. And we know antioxidants are really helpful. That's what protects the plant from stressors. So in fact, some plants, they actually, when they're in stressful environments, they actually produce more of those antioxidants. Now, lectins, we know a little bit about. There could be some positives, but that's early research. But the bottom line is we do know that they're harmful in large amounts if you're consuming raw beans, for example. But if you're not, they're perfectly fine. And in fact, I would say the benefits a lot of these foods that contain lectins far outweigh the downsides. And there's so many things you can do to lessen lectins too, if that is problematic for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you want to talk about the best way to consume lectins?
Yeah. So most commonly people think about nuts and beans when it comes to lectins. They are found in a bunch of other foods too. But when it comes to beans, of course, you want to cook thoroughly. One other thing you can do to lessen it a little bit more is to soak them ahead of time or even sprout them to reduce the lectin content. But generally, you don't have to go that far. If you're cooking your bean, that's not generally going to be a problem anyways. If canned beans are easier for you, go with a canned bean because the benefits of consuming beans in the diet is so helpful when it comes to gut health. They're really great at helping us produce something called butyrate within the gut. And butyrate is this key nutrient, it's kind of like a nutrient produced by your gut bacteria that helps to repair the GI tract. It helps to access fuel to the GI tract cells. It helps with reducing inflammation. So we want to encourage butyrate producers, if you can tolerate them well, and try and mitigate some of the symptoms with beans and fiber in general if you struggle with that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with that, Ashley, you said cooking them for longer periods, soaking them beforehand, even thinking about consuming more sprouted varieties too, because that can be a little bit easier on the digestive system. And also something we always talk about is not rushing into it, right? Like not jumping into like 2 cups of beans right away if you haven't had beans in years. we have to take that low and slow approach to give our gut some time to adjust, because the benefits truly outweigh anything that could be detrimental. And we don't really like put that word with lectins.
Right. Yeah. And I do think too sometimes the side effects that people get with a food like beans, it may be because they haven't eased into the food, or they're maybe too much too soon, or maybe we need to modify the food, the texture of the food, like a refried bean consistency instead of like a whole bean. But a lot of times people may have symptoms with a food like that. And, then they go online to search, like, okay, what's going on? Why am I symptomatic with beans? And then you get a whole bunch of this stuff about lectins. And I think that's where this fear of lectins just got amplified. Whereas a lot of the patients that we've seen thousands of people at this point, if we were to give them modifications for beans or ease them into it, generally beans are a highly feared food with IBD, but a lot of times, majority of the time, we're able to include them back pretty easily with some time. Even in your more severe cases, even in cases where people have other complications, sometimes there are modifications in place in short-term strategies you have to use in those cases, but generally we're able to help people with adding some of those things back to their diet and mitigating some of the symptoms that people are having. So there's lots of tips and tricks that that go with that we use, blending being one of them. We also have a good amount of things in our Rainbow Challenge, as well as our flare ebook, where we dive into modifications if you're in a flare up and you want to sort of ease into stuff that can be really therapeutic for your gut.
Absolutely. Yes. So if you need further support, Ashley is going to link some ebooks below for you to check out. And we hope you enjoyed listening today. We'll catch you in the next video.
All right. Thanks, everybody.